Happy Monday, everyone. This is Daniel here again for our latest episode of Founders Live. I am super excited to have my friend James here joining us today. James, how are you?
I'm great, Daniel. How are you? Good to be here.
Life is good. I'm excited to kick off the week with you. And, I'm sure there's lots of exciting stuff going on in both of our worlds. But I'm trying to remember, I think when we had first connected is when I was trying to build our business out of Cincinnati. And it was I think Steve Baggett and Jeff Weedman, who's a mentor of mine, had connected us. And in parallel, my co-founder knew Anthony Marino, who was working with you for many years. So I know it's about time we get a chance to properly sit down and chat.
Definitely. Well, excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, there's lots to get up on the ThredUp side. Obviously, this year's been very, very momentous for you, and we'll get to that exciting news later. But as I find in these conversations, I find it really fun to just start kind of at the beginning. From some of the research I read, you've kind of jumped around a couple of cities. You grew up in New Jersey, college in Boston, end up in California somehow after that. But when you were growing up in New Jersey, did you ever envision running a company? Like, what was growing up like for you?
Yeah, don't believe what you read on the internet, Daniel. You gotta be careful. But yes, look, I grew up in a very traditional, middle class, upper middle class family in New Jersey. I went to public schools. I had a lawn mowing business when I was a kid. I didn't do a lemonade stand, but I was definitely like a kid in from a very young age who kind of index more towards leadership roles and doing things like that. And so I was captain of the soccer team, right? And I was like on the student council, and I was probably half nerd, half jock growing up. And so I don't think that probably created the conditions for me to sell used clothes on the internet. But I definitely think there were elements of that DNA of my childhood. My parents were successful business people. My mom was a chemist. My dad was a lawyer, and so I had lots of people around me who had really successful career paths. And so, I think from an early age, I sort of was on a path to do something interesting. Right.
Yeah. And it's funny, I only made this connection right in this moment, but I would say the first time I ever made money doing something other than your parents giving you an allowance or whatever is actually, I guess you could say, secondhand, was on eBay. So I bought, I had a Game Boy and stuff that I grew up with, and at some point I'm like, I don't play these anymore. I'm just going to try to sell it on eBay. Yeah. And I think I made $100-$150, and I also had these memory cards. I don't know why, for a PlayStation. And I was like, this thing sold. I put that up too, and it sold really well. And then somehow I found this box of junk on eBay. Uh-huh. But somehow in the list of inventory, we have memory cards in this box of junk. So I took that money, bought this box of junk. I shipped, and it was a huge, it's double the size of this thing back here. Yeah. Most of it was pure trash, but then there was 20 memory cards that each would sell for $15 to $20. Yeah, and then every couple of days I'd go and ship it, and
Well, so. I think at a young age, you get I think you start to and your experience was all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I have $15 in my pocket or 100, right? And that sort of entrepreneurial spirit of well, what else can I do, right? and I think that there's something, I don't know whether it's in our DNA or what, but I definitely remember having that first time of having $20 in my pocket and being able to do whatever I wanted. And then I literally walked out and bought baseball cards with it.
You can ask, pretty good investment if you kept them.
But that freedom was a really an important part of my childhood.
Yeah. So you end up at Boston College. What made you decide to go there out of all the places you could have gone?
Well, I didn't get into a lot of places I wanted to go to. So, I was summarily rejected probably from a dozen colleges. And then I got into Boston College, and then I got into UVA. And I was really trying to decide kind of north south. And the true story is I went to Boston on like this beautiful fall day. People are like throwing frisbee in the yard, and it was like the like iconic classic, like this is what college is. And Boston's a great college town, and so I was like, well, I'll do this. And that was a time, that was when everything was done by paper, by mail, and I kind of I overnighted my application and like loved it all, got in, and the rest was history.
And did you have a vision? So like my own story for college, like I ended up going to doing a business undergrad because I didn't take physics, and I was pretty terrible at chemistry. So like I couldn't do engineering, and then medicine I knew, or as at least for my family, there's only a couple of little options you can pick, right? Yeah. Did you have a vision of going into college, what you had hoped to do coming out of it as a job, or?
Yeah, I think I always imagined doing something, in the liberal arts tradition, the humanities. My father was a lawyer. My sister was in law school at the time. My grandfather was an advertising man, in New York in the 60s and 70s. And so I think that was probably the path. I didn't study business. I didn't really have that path in mind. So I was a history major. And then I took a bunch of philosophy. So I was very much in that tradition. And, I read a lot of 19th century German history as an undergrad, which, prepares you for nothing. But look, I think what it did is it helped me like learn how to process lots of information and be a good student. And I think, entrepreneurs, if nothing else, we're good students.
Good students and good communicators. So I feel like doing that certainly helps. And so you end up going into teaching, and there's so much actually to unpack here. And I mean, very simply, how do you end up picking that as the thing opposed to all the other things of becoming a lawyer like your dad? Or
Yeah, I was really passionate about education. I was passionate about teaching history. I thought that a lot of the history teachers that I had in high school were underwhelming. But there were a few of them that were magical, right? And they were really inspiring to me. And so I was thinking about, that the ability to teach and to inspire kids was something that was really important to me. And so I wanted to be a teacher. And so I was like, well, I'll just do that because it's something that I'm really passionate about. And so I moved cross country. So I was in Boston, moved to the West Coast, got a teaching job, teaching history and English. And it was great. Those were wonderful times in my life. And I remember them fondly.
How'd you end up in the West Coast though? It seems like such a big jump to go from East Coast to West Coast and how do you find a teaching job out there out of all places?
Yeah, my sister was living in Seattle at the time. And so I was like, oh, I'm just going to go live with her in the summer and figure out what I'm going to do. This went over very well at home, just graduated with a college degree, no real plan. So I bartended the summer after I graduated from college as I was looking for teaching jobs. And then I found one in Santa Cruz, California. And so it was part-time, paid $24,000 a year. I was like, I'll take it. And moved. I flew back from Seattle to New Jersey, picked up my car, picked up a buddy. We drove cross country, got there like 2 days before my job started. And
what was that? And so obviously you were in school for history.
Yeah.
But now you're a teacher, which like I feel like that's a different. I mean, I have my brother, my half brother. He's a teacher, and he had to go through teachers college and had to do all this stuff. And it sounds like you rolled up, and I'm a part-time teacher of history. Like, what was that first day like?
Well, when I was in college, I was taking some like teaching credential classes, but for reasons that like are more complicated and nuanced, I couldn't get the teaching degree that I wanted because I couldn't take some of the classes that I needed to take based on some scheduling. So I had done some preparation, but then this was 2001. And at the time, the charter school movement in California was just getting started. And so because charter schools, you didn't need to have a credential at the time. You could be on a temporary, like 2-year emergency credential. I took advantage of kind of that credentialing process. And then really it was just having great mentors and, learning on the job and trying to do my best.
And when because I think this is a kind of a meta skill as a founder is finding your early mentors. And do you remember, someone who particularly was helpful to you back then and how you got to know them?
Yeah, I mean, the person that I got to know really well was another woman who was teaching English at the time, 8th grade.
Yeah.
And she was such a good mentor that I ended up marrying her. She became, we've been married, we've been together now 20 years.
Amazing.
Married for 14. But in all seriousness, I met my wife because she'd been teaching a few years, more than I, and we were teaching the same class. And so she always laughs when I tell the story.
And you said 8th grade, she was teaching 8th grade history?
She was teaching 8th grade English, and I was teaching a little bit of English and history. And but then there were other people around the school that were great. And and I was only teaching part-time, so I only had a few classes, so I could kind of spend half the day figuring out how to do the job and the other half of the day doing the job and rinse and repeat.
Yeah. Well, the one part I found very fascinating, and there's not as much I can read about it, but if you look at kind of your history, you're a teacher for a while, but then you move into what looks like a non-teaching role at the school. And I find that interesting because, again, a lot of people pick this career. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to progress and be a great teacher. What makes you take on this role? It says like development and communications, which sounds to me like, managing some part of the business side of the school.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I was really passionate about education, but I was much more interested in the policy side. And so it was, I love the teaching piece, but I also I was really interested in the way schools worked, right? And how schools worked for kids and how they worked for families. And so I moved into a role where, I was doing some of the fundraising for the school. I was doing a lot of the external relations. I was doing some, management of like the charter school community that we were in, both in Santa Cruz, but also in the state. And it gave me a lot of like really great perspective on school reform and pros and cons of charter schools and school choice and voucher programs and all that kind of stuff. And that's actually what led me to go and do the joint degree program that I did.
At Harvard. Yeah. It's, but a point here I want to focus on is like, how does that role even come out? Did you just like apply for the role, or like did you create the role? Because I'm sure there's lots of teachers, that we're talking just to teachers today, but there are people in like, oh, like I wish I could do something other than my current job, and then you made that happen somehow.
Yeah, I remember that they were, this was the charter school movement at the time had to raise money, and so one of the opportunities that the school had was, they were looking for somebody to help them raise money, and somebody that had, good relationships with parents and could, go out and talk to donors. And so, so I volunteered. I said, well, that's an interesting job. It paid more, than the teaching job I was doing because I was only part-time. And it seemed like a new challenge. And so I said, well, how about I'll do this development job, but then why don't we tack a few other things, around that, which became this sort of communications like role. And that's kind of how it got started. And so it became it was an internal role, with some external facing to parents. And then I just kind of expanded that role such that, it was something where I felt like I could keep learning. But I kept rewriting the job description. I did that for a few years, and every year I would sort of tack on some new stuff that I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, I did an interview many years back with a guy named Bonin Bao, and he eventually took the role at the time as the chief e-com officer at Mondelez. And he had a kind of similar story of like, oh, there's a need for like this kind of role. And he knew in his head, he has this very much theory of like, oh, like getting a C-suite title at a Fortune 500 company, in his view, was really important because it gave him lots of impact in the business. And the title gave you the license for impact, which is different than what you and I are probably used to of like starting a company. It's like, oh, the titles are kind of irrelevant at the early days. It's what can you actually execute and deliver. But I bring that up only because he essentially like created that job for himself. And there was no chief e-com officer that existed anywhere, but he built it for himself.
and I got to interface. And then the other thing that I really enjoyed was I got to meet a lot of interesting people, and I think one of the things that I've always really valued in my career, and certainly early in my career, was, having access and meeting interesting people, who are making, who's making change in the industry, right? Who are the leaders? And, I think a lot of that work, ultimately paid off, right? Because I think it gave me perspective on, how transformation happens, how culture is built, right? What's the role of policy? So it was a very formative part for me.
Yeah. Well, another part I'm curious about, because there's kind of, at this point, you're practicing a lot of the things that you have to do when you're starting ThredUp, of like fundraising, as an example.
Yeah, exactly.
Fundraising for a chart. Do you remember what, I don't know if you had to cold call people, or what the strategy was?
Yeah. Yeah. No, there was a ton of, direct, what's traditionally called major donors, right? Where you're sitting down with people, and I think fundraising for nonprofits like we were, is in some ways harder, because you're really appealing to people's passion and sense of purpose, versus I think in a more traditional venture investment, there's that, right? But it's also can I generate a financial return based on the kind of the fiduciary responsibility. And so I think a lot of that, pitching, storytelling, connecting with people, I think that has worked well, fundraising for ThredUp, but also just, how do you recruit employees, right? How do you inspire employees? I think storytelling is something you have to practice all the time, no matter where you are.
Do you remember what script ended up working best back then, or a memorable donor you got?
Well, I remember, what I have to say that the thing that often resonated with people is that, is that they were giving to a school that was providing this education that could not exist without their support in their community. And so it was really it was really a pitch around access, because the school that we, that we had was really about providing college prep school for kids who might not be able to get it at a traditional high school. And so it was really an equity and access, story. And I think people got that.
And so, interesting point you mentioned earlier about this, your interest in policy and your exposure to donors and policies, kind of what led you to Harvard. One interesting thing I found that I want to ask you about is that some version of your essay to Harvard is in a book called 65 Successful Harvard Business School Application Essays. Amazing title. You can find it on Amazon. Let me start there. Why is your essay in a book? How did that come about?
Well, I think the story about getting into Harvard Business School is an interesting one, because I think what often people don't know is that so when I originally applied to the Joint Degree Program, it was Kennedy School of Government, Master's in Public Policy, HBS, MBA, and I didn't get into the business school. I just got into the Kennedy School, and the business school was like, no thanks. And so I had this decision of well, do I just go and do half the degree, right, or do I just go and do the public policy part? And I thought, yeah, it's the Kennedy School is great. Public policy is what I was interested in, and so when I got to the Kennedy School, I was like, well, I really like it here. I should reapply. And so while I was there, I applied again to the business school, and this is where the essay comes in. And so my second application, I sort of rethought the whole process. And the first time when I did my application, I basically crowdsourced some of my smartest friends to help me edit and craft my story and all this and the essays ended up being well written, but not authentic. And when I applied the second time, I didn't let anybody read any of them. Right, which sort of runs counter to everything you're supposed to do with writing essays and or applying to business school. So nobody read anything. It was just me, but it was this very raw, authentic, me on paper. That's the essay that ends up in this book. And the reason I think I got in was that I was just much more. I was sort of more comfortable in my own skin, and I was more authentic about who I was and what I was trying to do. And I think that shows through, in the essays. And so the essays get picked by Harvard Business School students. I don't know how objective the process is.
You're in the top-ish 65, which I guess is great for that class, right?
Yeah, but no, I'm glad it's in there. And but I really like to share the story of like, you really do have to find your voice, as an applicant or as an entrepreneur, because that's really what drives, like, I think, a successful outcome.
Yeah. Well, so this is my pivot into ThredUp. Is if you read, anyone's curious, look up James in Amazon. You can read the essay for yourself. But the short Coles Notes is that talks a lot about the Beacon Education Network and your vision for kind of transforming education through Beacon or whatever else you do at Harvard. How does your next couple of years at Harvard shift you into starting something like ThredUp? What happened along the way?
Yeah, so I was, when I was in the joint degree program, I was kind of going back and forth. I was trying to start the schools alongside. I had this incredible mentor, co-founder, a guy named Tom Brown, and we brought on another guy named J. Zach Stein, and the three of us were helping get the schools started. But increasingly, I was finding that it was hard to have both the Santa Cruz manifestation of what I wanted to do, also with like the more national federal policy piece, which I was passionate about. And so I was kind of trying to do both, and neither was working, because one was 3,000 miles away, and one was at a very different altitude. And so I was kind of managing both of those. And then the true story is that I then had this moment where I thought, maybe I don't want education to be my like primary career, right out of the gate. The HBS and the Kennedy School had opened my eyes to so many other interesting things, and being an entrepreneur was one of those. And then the truth is, I had like the entrepreneurial moment that people have, right? I mean, it's not as though like I went to school and like figured it all out. I literally had the like, closet full of clothes I wasn't going to wear moment, which, I've said more like 10,000 times. But I mean, it's like true. And so then I saw an opportunity, I saw a problem, and I felt compelled to take it.
And so I was going to touch on that, and you kind of already half answered the question about, that you have this moment of, I tried to sell these clothes, I couldn't, like there had to be another way. Before you say, I'm going to go build this as a business, and let's say after you've kind of said the Beacon Education Network is not what I'm going to build, was there an idea number 2, 3, or 4 that you had thought about or tested before you decided on the V1 of ThredUp?
There wasn't, there probably wasn't anything that I like really built an MVP of. I remember dabbling with an idea around in education technology at the time, around one of the things I was passionate about was, if you're a low income family, and you have a kid in school, and you're working 2 jobs, and it's like hard for you to keep up on what's happening in your kid's school life. This is like 12, 13 years ago. I was thinking like, hey, there needs to be a platform to do this communication between parent and teacher by text message. Yeah. Like mobile. And so I got really into that for a while, but then I couldn't quite figure out how to make money doing that. And so I like dabbled with some other stuff, but nothing really lit it up for me like the idea that ThredUp was.
Yeah. And so you go through that moment that you've spoken about many times. What, like the day after you kind of try to sell these clothes, what made you all of a sudden not just like, oh, okay, I can't do this, let's, I don't know, move on. Like, I'm just going to bring it to Goodwill and like, do something else. Like how does that all of a sudden turn into, like I can make money doing this?
Yeah. I think that, there's something about, I'd always been sort of mildly obsessed with inefficient markets. Like I've just always like been a guy like, I don't understand why this and this, like they don't work. Right. And so intellectually, I was very interested in market inefficiency and secondhand to, the secondhand market selling clothes to me seemed like a really inefficient market. And so part of me was just obsessed with the idea that this was a really inefficient market that like was like trapped in the Stone Ages. And so I was like really interested in like, well, maybe I'll just chase this down and I it started as a school project, so like I spent like, I used that class, I was able to get class credit to work on this, which is always a bonus, right? I was like, oh, I can work on this and HBS will give me credits. Perfect. And so part of it was opportunistic, which is like, hey, could work on this idea I thought was cool and get credit for it. And then the second is that I had another entrepreneur in my world. So a guy named Brian Spaley, who Brian Spaley was a co-founder at Bonobos.
Very cool.
And then went on to become the CEO of Trunk Club. Is now like a very prolific angel investor. I think he has a new VC firm now. But I remember having a conversation with Brian talking about the ThredUp idea, which, he thought was both like interesting and silly. And he said, why don't you just give yourself a semester, like a semester to work on it? He's like, imagine you were like on the slow track at HBS. So instead of graduating in 4 semesters, it took you 5, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, so just give yourself through the fall, And I was like, And that, for whatever reason, like registered with me, like gave me license to chase this idea, for like 6-7 months. And then it became really exciting.
And so what, at the end of that 6 months, what were the data points that you're seeing that gave you conviction? That's like, like who needs a job? Who needs to go back to teaching? Like, this is my thing.
Well, I had been able to convince like some smart people to join me, like Oliver Lubin, who was one of my college roommates, was the first co-founder to join as like design, and Chris Homer, who was our third co-founder, joined on the technology side. And so I don't think there was any like compelling enough data points like on the surface, if you were to look at them and like, oh, this is a dashboard of a company that's going to go public in 10 years, said no one ever, right?
Yeah.
But I think like what we did have was we had a team where we were having tons of fun, and we felt like there was an interesting market opportunity, and we were getting just enough like external validation. We had raised a tiny bit of money. The New York Times wrote a launch article about us. Like there was just enough like where you're like, this is fun. This is cool. Yeah. Like this might work. And so, I mean, that's kind of how, we kept feeling like there was something there. And we just needed to see it through. And we pivoted from the, men's to kids. And then we figured out kids to women's. And so we just kept iterating until we were able to convince an investor to give us some money.
There's so many. You touch on all the different things I'd love to dive into. The first thing I'm curious about is, other than I assume you and your friends and your wife and your wife's friends, like, do you remember who was the first person that either gave you a bag of clothes or bought, some clothes on your site?
Well, so when ThredUp started, it was a men's shirt swapping service.
Wow, very different.
Which is a terrible idea. But like the insight of that was, we've got closets full of clothes we don't wear, right? Like you've got a closet full of shirts you don't wear. I'm
staring at it like right here.
Like the insight is like there, like the mechanism and the business and the market, that was all going to change. But like there, every like entrepreneur has to have like some insight around like the way the world works. And so But so the two stories, I mean, we probably had 200, 300 of our friends, of guys that we kind of knew in it. Yeah. Section mates at HBS, friends of friends. They never miss an opportunity to make fun of me for like, hey, I sent like the 27th shirt, right? And they like pulled it up and show me. But that's how it got started. And but it was tiny.
Yeah. And so as the business is getting going, like that article, that coverage you got, was that when still you were focused on men's clothing, or?
Yeah.
So how do you, because like, I mean, everyone dreams of something like that. How did you snag that?
I mean, I remember it fondly. Like it's like September, like 25th, 2009. So Jenna Wortham was the reporter who wrote that. And she was like, just like writing like the Bits blog, the New York Times, now she's like big time, like at the Times. And, but, I think they were just looking for like, interesting stories, and like Netflix was very, people were building the Netflix of this and the Netflix of that. And so it was like, it fit into a nice box of like Netflix for shirts kind of thing. And it was a launch story, which, people liked. And so, but again, I think those types of things just gave us enough validation to feel like there was something to keep going on.
And this is before the world of Facebook ads and Instagram and all the performance marketing things we all love and talk about today. How did you grow the business back then? So you have this article, but like, what was the day-to-day like to drive demand?
That's big. That's back when referral programs became super big. Like refer your friends, earn $10. Like that was the era of, like, I remember Guilt.
Yep.
And Rue La La, right? All those like flash sale businesses were big, and that was a time when newsletters were really big. Remember Daily Candy, like Urban Daddy, right? Like all these, like, and so it was like a newsletter game. It was a referral game. It was definitely an SEO game. But those were kind of the core drivers in the beginning, and then earned media. Right. You were just like pounding the pavement, trying to convince people to write about you.
It goes back to before storytelling, that's clearly a superpower for your founding team.
And it's, the mommy blog world. Again, I say it specifically, like it was mom blogging was like had a breakout moment, right, in that period. And so we relied a lot on that content.
We were at I'd say the tail end of that, because I was involved in 2010, 2011, building a beauty subscription box in Canada. And mommy, it was when you could get YouTube influencers for like, hey, I'll ship you this box. And they'll, like, that's it. Like, imagine today, it's like, oh yeah, that plus, $1,000 per post plus what are you going to give me on the back end?
No, it was a totally different animal. And I honestly, I don't know whether like it's harder today because there's so much noise out there, or easier because there are more tools. I don't know. People ask, like, what should I do today? And I almost feel like the feedback I have on how to get started is almost outdated, right? Because the tools of 10 years ago are not the tools of today.
Yeah, but I think one thing that is pretty common, I would say, or consistent, is just being a good, like, understanding your story, right? So at the time, the story of we are the Netflix of clothes, and somehow like crafting a narrative around that, even though it's, it's not like Netflix is a very different business, but somehow you kind of made that story work. And then it sounds like figuring out some way to be consistent in the media, in the news, and then also understanding the channels that were in vogue of the day, right? You're getting your best acquisition cost from brokering deals with mommy blogs and doing referrals. And today it's Facebook and Instagram, and, tomorrow might be Clubhouse and this and that. And like,
well, it's even funny, like the Netflix thing, that actual analogy worked better back then, because that's when it was a DVD business.
Yeah.
Right? Like the streaming hadn't even started yet, right? So it was, you sent in your DVDs and you got stuff back, right? And so the idea for clothing was similar. So it's funny how, like, even then, I mean, people who come to Netflix, they don't even know that there was a DVD.
Yeah, I totally forget about that. Yeah. Oh my God. So to jump onto the fundraising side, so eventually someone, cut the check, but how are you funding all this stuff in the early days? Did you raise an angel round, or was it just savings from you and your co-founders?
Yeah, we raised a little bit of money from like friends and family. We raised, I think, about $250,000 or so. And we ran the company on that $250,000 for like 2 years.
Wow.
From like end of like 18, 19 months. So like beginning of 2009 through to summer of 10.
That's crazy.
And it was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my wife, the teacher, that, like, she was rolling in cash as a teacher. So, she was really able to support the family.
That's and I mean, I guess you got to know each other well as your co-founder. Did you like bring anyone else on to help you in that period?
Yeah, we brought on some people. I remember, pitching Karen Clark, who now runs like all of comms for us. And like I told her, I was like, I can't really pay you very much, but how about $2,000 a month? She was like, okay, yeah.
Trust me, we'll be big. Don't worry.
Yeah, we brought people on, and we, we sold them on what we were trying to do, and I think we and we just sort of, it was like the fun of joining a startup, right? Yeah. And I'm not sure anybody ever really thought it would come to where it is today, but we certainly were having fun. And
so, you mentioned a bit on your fundraising journey. and the count again on the internet says 27 pitches rejected. I'm sure there are many more other conversations along the way, but and you can correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like there's a woman named Patricia Trinity that put in led your first round or first institutional money. What do you think changed with her? Let's assume she's pitched 28. Like, what do you think clicked with her that was different than anyone else you had talked to at that point?
I think one, the story kept getting better, right? Mm-hmm. So, definitely like we got sharper around the market, right? And we had better customer data. I also think that she was a mom of 3 kids, and so I think like as a customer, so like I think she understood the customer better than a lot of people that we had pitched, and so. I think, a lot of fundraising is about finding the right yes and not trying to convince all the people who say no. And so I think we were able to find somebody who like instinctually got it. And then look, we had a strong introduction from one of my classmates, a guy named Sunil Nagaraj, who, was who Patricia had invested in his company. And so, I think the stars sort of aligned, and, Patricia had invested in care.com, which was another company that was, was focused on caregiving and focused on moms and things like that. So I think it was like, we got a little bit lucky probably. And then I think we just found the right person who got us.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like at that point, you, by this point, have pivoted the focus on kids items.
Yeah,
but it wasn't just clothing, because I was watching another video and it wasn't just like, it was like anything your kid uses and now grown. Like, was there any like crazy stuff you got? Like,
we got all kinds of stuff that, my favorite is like when people would send us puzzles, and like from a quality assurance, it was like, okay, do we have to put the puzzles together? How does that work? Right? Like that sounds like it might be a lot of time. But yeah, we were at that point, you're just sort of trying to figure out like what might stick. And so we also had that classic, like looking for something that will stick, that grows the opportunity.
And I think one thing that we've kind of glossed over, but I imagine it was incredibly hard, because I don't know who else I would have asked to help me with this, is like, what was like the V1 of logistics of, like, because you have to it's not like I could just go buy the inventory, which, is a cash flow. So you legally have to buy the inventory. So great. You don't have to have a cash flow, but you have to receive it. Like, is it at your kitchen table? Like, how did that work in the first?
Yeah. I mean, when we started, it was peer-to-peer, right? So we didn't actually have the logistics, but that's not entirely true, because to kind of jumpstart the market, we had to like build the supply. I remember a woman named Jenny Thompson, wonderful woman who worked for us for a very long time. I remember she was like driving around Massachusetts, like picking up clothes like off of Craigslist, right? Wow. To like cold start the market. And so that's how we got started. But, we did, and then when we switched to like touching the product ourselves, this was in 2011. We started in our like 1,800 square foot like walk up San Francisco office, and there's a great photo of like a UPS guy showing up with like 2 ThredUp bags, like in like vintage ThredUp bags, being like, "Do these belong to you guys?" And then we ended up having to get a warehouse like a couple of weeks later, which we negotiated a 6-month paid upfront lease for like this 8,000 square foot like crappy building in San Francisco.
San Francisco real estate is just a great deal even back then, right?
I remember, we moving into this warehouse, and oh man, yeah.
And so what prompted the shift from like peer to peer? Because I imagine the peer to peer is a lot more attractive of a model. At some point, you decide like, you know what, peer to peer is just not gonna work.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started, and I think that it's still true today, that there's this perception that like asset light is better, right? That if you don't if you don't touch things, just like unicorns and fairies emerge and people just throw money at you. Yeah. And I do think that there are times when asset light, does work, but I actually think our thesis was that we were never going to be able to crack this supply chain. We were never going to be able to get supply in a real meaningful way without doing more work for the seller.
Yeah.
And so the key insight was that, which is, the real friction in this market is on the supply side. And the only way we're going to access this TAM and drive supply is if we do the hard work of getting the stuff out of your closet and doing the logistics and the distribution. And I think that was like the key insight that frankly has powered ThredUp to where it is today, doing the really hard work. And so, we thought about ourselves a lot like Amazon. Back in the day, it was like, hey, let's build the infrastructure. Let's do the logistics.
You're the best reverse logistics company in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that really changed the whole DNA and strategy for us. But I think it was critical.
Yeah. So the other point I wanted to touch on was on just building the brand in this. Like you essentially, there was, I guess, a category that we knew back in the day, 10, 20 years ago, of what secondhand was thrift was.
Yeah.
I imagine it was very difficult in the early days to, on the supply side, I would, I'm kind of speaking openly here, but on the supply side, the pitch is like, I make some money off my closet. Right?
Yep.
But then on the buy side, I'm like, I don't know, like, is this gonna smell funny? Is this gonna be weird? I used to go to, I mentioned Goodwill, like, I'm sure back then that's what people are thinking about, right?
Yeah.
How do you build such a beautiful, amazing, brand that people love, given all these barriers along the way?
Yeah, I think we were trying to, I think the customer insight was that it wasn't that people couldn't find great value in secondhand clothing. It was that the shopping experience was not amazing. Right. It was it's not that there wasn't great stuff buried at Goodwill. The problem is it was buried at Goodwill and it smelled like a thrift store.
Yeah.
And so what we were really trying to reinvent was, okay, well, how do we destigmatize secondhand and create this online experience where you don't actually remember that it's secondhand. And so I think the brand has been an evolution. And look, I think in some ways the consumer, kind of the world has caught up to ThredUp around, secondhand is cool. People, it's not even just great value. People prefer it now, right?
Yeah.
Over new clothing because it's more unique and it's better for the environment. And so I think there's a bunch of macro trends that we both saw coming a little bit, but have also benefited by just consumer mindshare, shift. And so, but look, I think we've done a lot of the hard work to make thrift cool.
Yeah.
We were early into that. And I think the team has done an incredible job of storytelling, continuing that, work with influencers and all kinds of, folks that make secondhand cool.
And so as you think about building the business today, from a brand perspective, is there any particular campaign or story or something that's been working really well for you that you think has helped drive that narrative?
I think that these big breakout campaigns with celebrities or we did something with Christian Siriano around New York Fashion Week, for the first time ever. There was secondhand clothes, at New York Fashion Week.
Very cool.
So I think but we also did a segment, in the early days called Badass Moms. And it was all about awesome moms. This was 2013, 2014, maybe. About just incredibly creative and successful, moms and women in the workplace, right? Who were also trying to stretch their dollar and do good for their kids and their families. And so I think we probably do 2 or 3 of these big brand moments a year. And I think that has really we did something with Emma Watson last year. We just did something with Paris Hilton of all people, right? Around just, being more mindful with their clothing choices. And, Paris was great. She's look, she was her identity was wrapped up in conspicuous consumption. Yeah. And has really had to change a heart around who she wants to be. And so I think we've the team has really done a great job of picking and choosing these moments to inspire people to make a difference and make change in their lives.
To kind of take us as we're running towards the end of our time together, you mentioned kind of these important moments. An important moment in your life, it's March 26th, 2021. The company goes public. What did it feel like when you saw the ticker live?
It was, I mean, I think the whole day is sort of surreal. I think it's funny. We started the company in the middle of a recession, and taking it public in the middle of a pandemic just feels like a natural arc. I think it was a great moment for all the employees and everybody who sort of, believed and invested in us. It's also like, I think it's made us more ambitious. I think it's really like a validation of like a lot of the work that we've done, but also I think a real like, hey, good work, keep going. Like kind of also keeping the pants, like, all right, good job. Now get out there and make this company worth $10 billion.
You're now, at the starting line of the Olympic track.
which I kind of like. I found myself. Yeah, I feel like I'm more ambitious than I've probably ever been, and about what the impact that we can make and what we can do. So yeah, kind of a surreal day. It was also surreal because, when you go public and you open the bell, you do this, you then basically spend like 7 hours on the phone talking to reporters. And so it's a little bit funny because people think you're out there like, drinking champagne, but really you're in the conference room talking to reporters.
Yeah. Well, that was another question I was going to ask, and it's only now being about a month and a bit, I guess, 30 days plus a couple of days. What has been the biggest change, if anything, for how your day-to-days are now opposed to before you were public?
Yeah, I think I think most of my time now I spend thinking about, how to really expand the opportunity. So, how do we make the TAM bigger? How do we influence, people and markets and other companies? And so again, I think it's back to more storytelling, right? But I'm not telling stories as much inside the company around product or design or culture or anything like that. It's more about, hey, here's what secondhand can be, the impact it can make in the world, right? I mean, fashion accounts for close to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Right? It's really bad for the planet. So I now spend more of my time thinking about that type of way to influence, which is nice because it almost comes full circle, right? How I started, which is, how do you make a difference in the world, and not just doing it in a different way. Yeah.
Oh, this is probably too simple of a question for the time we have left, but maybe we can try it. We could try to hit it. And it's this idea of storytelling, because we started there and we can keep coming back to it. And so maybe as a teaser for a future conversation we'll have on storytelling, let's focus the question on, there's a lot of entrepreneurs watching. Actually, I have a comment here. Jody, thank you for sharing your story, James. So we'll have a question on this topic. If I'm, when you raised your round from Patricia, let's put you there. And so I'm a founder at that stage of my business. How should I think about crafting a good founder story? Because I'm going to use that to get my first customers, my first employees, my first investors. What were some tips or tricks or tactics of how you'd construct that?
Well, I think that I think that the story that you need to tell is a story that, or the story that you try and craft is a story that you actually want to tell for the next 10 years. And I think like what I often tell people is like, when you think about starting a business, right? Like you're going to work on this for a minimum of 10 years. Like it's going to be like right now, it's like 25% of my life I've spent working on this. And so that you need to really get excited by that story. And so, and the story will have new chapters, right? So like not to beat the metaphor to death, right? But like it'll have new narrative arcs and it'll have different chapters, but like the core story of like what you're trying to do, needs to be something that like really excites you day in and day out. And I think, back in the day, like I was really, as I said earlier, like I was really excited about like inefficient markets. And I was excited about like unlocking assets, and I was excited about sustainability. And so these like elements of that story were something that I wanted to tell everybody and anybody who would listen, right? Even
Yeah.
you today, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so these are things I'm super passionate about. And I think if you're passionate about it and it's a story you really want to think about for 10 years, that's like a good framework.
Yeah, I mean, even just to build on that, it's almost like I think a check for you as the founder, even before when you're like, I'm going to be all into this business, because you're 100% right. Like, you're all in for a long period of time, and you're going to have to live off of, $250,000 split between, 3 to 5 people and your families, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like, if you can't get excited about a story that you've like, I'm going to be into this for the next 10 years, I'm like, there's probably not a founder company fit.
Yeah. Yeah,
So.
no, it's a really nice screen, for your like when people come and like ask me for, or they're pitching a company or something like that, and I often ask them like, is this a 10-year idea? You're excited about this for the next 10, right? And often it's like, oh well,
I don't know. So yeah, back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Well, the last thing I'd love to finish off on, I think it's pretty clear on what you're excited about with the business and where ThredUp's going, and this movement to think secondhand first. That's incredibly important and amazing what you're doing. I would love to hear from a personal side of what are you excited about next with family. It looks like you're in a lovely, relaxing place somewhere in the world. Calling it, your Wi-Fi held up incredibly well, so props to whoever's providing you that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have 3 kids. My oldest is 10, about to be 11, about to be 8, 6. They've now done a year and a half of school on Zoom. I think we're ready to kind of turn the page on the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think they're ready to go back to school, and so and I think that like there's all this like personal like ready to turn the page kind of feeling, because you almost feel like you can kind of see the light, right?
Yeah.
As vaccinations are up and the world's reopening. And so, from there, then I think that people at ThredUp will come back to work. Right. And I miss the team a lot. Right. I mean, I think we've built such an incredible culture, and we also moved into an amazingly awesome new office right before we moved to shelter.
So did we.
Yeah.
Beautiful space. Yeah. We were there for 3 months.
Yeah. 4 months. I was like, oh, so, I'm kind of like ready to get out of the woods, and get back after it. So,
amazing. Yeah. I feel like it's a sidebar on, there's like another 2-hour conversation on education and education reform in the era of Zoom.
Yeah. It's funny. My wife and I, obviously both like taught for a couple of years. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we were like really like gung ho and fired up on it. And like now, a year and a half later, I'm like, oh my God, if I never do another homeschool event in my life, that will be
the nostalgia's worn off. You love teaching for a reason.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, we're seeing some great, everyone's been enjoying it. I wish we could see your name, but everyone's really enjoying everything you shared today. So all I just want to say is, James, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and for building an iconic business that I hope will continue to change the world and everything you're doing on the environment, on sustainability, and then also just building a company that us as other entrepreneurs can be inspired by, to hopes to build something similarly as impactful in our career. So thank you, and hope you have an amazing rest of your day and week.
Yeah, awesome. Well, appreciate the time, Daniel, and thanks for bringing me into it. It's great.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, see you guys later. Have a great day.